Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the first Product Cuties Community AMA. I'm really happy to introduce Phyllis Njoroge to you today, who'll be talking to us about imposter syndrome. Phyllis will, of course, tell you more details about the amazing work that she's done in this area. But she's a growth product manager at Redfin and has a Bachelor of Science in Cognitive and Brain Sciences from Tufts, as well as a Women's Entrepreneurship certificate from Cornell University. And like the rest of us probably in this call, has experienced imposter syndrome, worked with others who have battled against it, and decided to do something about it and wrote a book. So we're here today to talk about it, to ask questions, and I guess learn how to cope with imposter syndrome. So Phyllis, hi, welcome.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I feel very honored, and I'm going to try and keep this brief so that we can actually spend more time talking about all of these things as much as possible and asking questions and sharing experiences. So give me a moment to share my screen. Can you give me co-host privilege so that I can share? It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Sorry, my bad.
No worries.
Second. All right, you should be able to do it now.
Thank you. Okay.
Is it working?
Yeah. I need to come back into the room since I granted it screen sharing access. 1 second.
All right, no worries. Well, Phyllis and I are talking about the rookie mistakes I've been making as a community organizer earlier, and here's one of them. Speaking of imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah, I feel like there's always something with like Zoom or Google Meet that I get wrong. That damn bug that you get with a Mac as well. It's super annoying.
After now years of a pandemic and living online, this is still not simpler or seamless. So, and she's back.
Hello. Okay. Can you see this beautiful screen?
There we go.
I can.
Amazing. Okay, lovely. Well, I first wanted to thank you for making this absolutely beautiful presentation poster that I decided to use it for the cover slide because it's stunning. So yes, welcome. Talking about imposter syndrome. As mentioned, I'm Phyllis. I'm the author from Fraud to Freedom, which is a book on growing through imposter syndrome. And then I'm also a growth product manager. So just thinking about growth in all aspects of my life. And first, I wanted to address what exactly is imposter syndrome, just to give context on how I define it, since the term is used by a lot of people in many different ways. So I think of it as self-doubt that becomes attached to your identity. So you can doubt yourself on a specific assignment. It becomes imposter syndrome when you doubt whether I'm speaking of myself, whether I should be a product manager in the first place or whether I should be at this company or in this industry. So I call it self-doubt that inflates into an identity crisis, right? So it's like, sometimes people will say, I'm having imposter syndrome on filling out this form, but they're like doubting themselves on filling out a form, but it's not, you don't feel like an imposter about filling out forms. But in a greater context, it's like, maybe your job is literally filling out forms. Like you write the grants, for example, and then you're doubting yourself on the general ability to perform competently in that role. So now you're questioning your identity in that context. So I just wanted to explain what exactly that means and how it differentiates from self-doubt in any specific circumstance. And you might have noticed that when I mentioned my book, the book is on growing through imposter syndrome, not overcoming imposter syndrome, because it is something that we continue to experience at different aspects and stages of our lives. And even if at one point we feel like yay, I'm not experiencing imposter syndrome anymore. All it really takes is being in a new environment, a new situation, a new role, or even just a new context. For example, a pandemic happening, even if nothing about the specific situation you're in has changed. So I talk about how it needs to be managed and how you grow through it, as opposed to how it should be overcome, because it is something that we'll continue to face in different parts of our life. So what exactly triggers imposter syndrome? And that usually comes from feeling different in some way. Otherwise, if you felt the same, you wouldn't feel like an imposter. And emphasizing the fact that differences don't make you less deserving, right? So background being first gen, low income, international, different major, homeschooled, career switching, or maybe parts of your identity, your race, your gender, your sexuality, your nationality. If you're neurodivergent, thinking that those things somehow contribute to you being an imposter in any given circumstance, but understanding the differences do not make you less deserving. If anything, you've overcome a lot of challenges to be in the situation that you are in, and trying to remember to push back against the assumption that you don't belong just because you don't pattern match those before you in any given space. And also thinking about the fact that if everyone were equally great at everything, we'd never need each other. And we live in a society and we work in organizations because we actually literally need differences in order to be as fruitful as possible in whatever we're pursuing. So reminding ourselves that not only do differences not make us inferior, but they also make all of us better in the process, creating the opportunity for community and support. And part of what happens when you're dealing with imposter syndrome is you're comparing your differences to someone else. And even if you're comparing your differences to yourself, that can also be a challenge. I find that people are like, you only have to be better than you, but it's like, what exactly does that mean? So part of managing imposter syndrome looks like making adjustments around what a level of performance in a new situation can realistically accommodate. So something that I mentioned is that we all were hit with a pandemic, and the way that our brains and minds and schedules and skills and abilities worked before seemingly changed very quickly. And, things like brain fog became a thing, or just like the exhaustion of working remote, or all these other aspects became introduced. And people are like, I used to be so good at this. I used to have such an easier time dealing with this thing, or like I used to work so many more hours, et cetera, et cetera. What happened to me? And wondering if there's something wrong with them, but it's actually an experience in which we're all sharing, because we all were hit with this very strong change in circumstance, and not expecting that what worked 3 years ago or 2 years ago or last year or even last month is going to work today. And even if you're only trying to do better than the person you were yesterday you were in different circumstances, and trying to compare yourself even to yourself can be challenging, because that assumes that everything is always a linear trend up. And that's not necessarily the case, because our circumstances change on a daily basis. So reminding yourself that what your best looks like isn't always going to be the same every day. And on days when you only had 40% and you gave 40%, you actually gave 100%. And a lot of people will be like, well, I wasn't even half. And it was like, actually, you were whole. So I don't know who came up with that quote. I tried to figure out where to attribute it from, and it just seems like distributed people have said that, but whoever said it was very right. And it's something that I think we can all take into a given circumstance, and reminding ourselves that our 100% doesn't always look like the 100% that we might be used to. And then another thing that I wanted to note is that in this, you'll notice that I'm trying to get past common ways that people try to address self-doubt or imposter syndrome, right? It's like, oh, just compare yourself to who you were yesterday. It's like, actually, there's some nuance to that. And similarly, people are like, progress over perfection. Actually, there's some nuance to that too. And shifting from always improving to always making progress, right? So it's like, you might go to the gym every day, but it's not like you're going to get better and better linearly every single day, but you're still making progress by going to the gym every day. And if you end up in a situation where you expect every day's performance to beat yesterday's performance, as opposed to considering progress the fact that you continue to show up, then you might feel deflated and feel as if you're not improving. And sometimes the truth is that you won't improve in equal batches at equal scales at equal intervals, and improvement might be over an extended period of time, but that doesn't mean you're making progress, even though you're not technically improving. So understanding that improvement can only be measured after compounded effort. So keep showing up even when the outcomes haven't yet shifted in a way that motivates you to feel as if you're continuing to improve. And as I mentioned, being a growth product manager, writing a book on growth, my life is very focused on growth. And I found that for myself and for other people that sometimes growth can be synonymous with self-criticism. And there is a way to grow without having the situation of always being hard on yourself. And a lot of people find that they're motivated to grow only when they're hard on themselves, but I want to address a way to grow while taking pride in the progress along the way. So taking pride in accomplishing something, even if it was harder or more time consuming than expected, or the opposite, even if it was simple or easy to do, right? Some people underestimate their own strengths and their values, the value that they add to certain spaces because they're like, oh, I just put that together in like 5 minutes. And it doesn't mean because it was easier for you to do or harder for you to do than you expected, or than it is for other people, that it's not valuable. And just taking pride in the fact that what you're contributing and doing is valuable. And then another aspect is that even if there was luck involved, it doesn't deny your effort in the process, right? Like, let's say you're applying to a program, there's like a very small percentage of people that get in, and then by luck, the person who was like reading your application also happens to be from Tennessee, and then they like took favor on you and they loved your application and decided to admit you with that bias in mind. And it doesn't mean that your application wasn't great. There's luck involved in anything that any of us do. And that doesn't deny your effort in the process and the things that you've contributed to make your own achievements happen. So part of this is always assuming that everything is an opportunity for growth. So if you have that default mindset that everything's an opportunity for growth, that prevents you from settling once you think you're better than others, but also prevents you from feeling shame when you think others are better than you. And something that I'm trying to get at here is that growth doesn't have to be built upon self-criticism. There's a way to be proud of the progress that you're making and still understand that there's room for you to grow. And those two things don't need to happen separately. And then when you're thinking about that, saying, this is where I am at, and I appreciate that, and it can be improved upon. I think that "and" is really critical here, because sometimes people like to treat pride or growth as separate paths, and they can go together the entire way. And this is a pride that doesn't stop you from wanting to do more. And sometimes people are like, oh, well, if I'm too happy about where I'm at, then I'm not going to be motivated to do anything else. And that's not necessarily the case. And wanting to do more also doesn't stop you from being proud of where you are at right now. So the last piece of this is, not only is it important to think about growth for yourself and the environment you create for yourself, but creating an environment that's safe for others to be growing as well. So praising others for efforts over outcomes. So I hope you're proud of all the work that you put into this, versus saying your launch went perfectly, great job, because we can't control all the aspects of life. And sometimes we can accidentally put pressure on ourselves or others by praising an outcome that has a lot of inputs and influences and factors and luck, for example, versus what we did and how that was our best. And even though there are variables that are outside of our control, we're in control of our actions. And I find it much more effective to praise our own actions and to praise the actions of others, rather than assume that everything needs to be perfect and come out perfectly in order for the actions and efforts that people put in or we put into a situation to be valid. Similarly, model openly discussing failure. So failure is a loose word here, but having retrospectives on projects that didn't go well, for example, reflecting on things in your own life that you can improve upon, and discussing that openly, and not treating failure in quotation marks as something to be ashamed of, because without reflecting on the things in which didn't go the way that we wanted, we're not able to make progress on improving those things. It's been said that you can't change what you don't acknowledge, and by hiding failure or mistakes, we end up in a position where we're bound to continue to make them. And then lastly, encouraging people to attempt something even if they're nervous, in a low pressure way, or join them to try something new. I find that sometimes it feels like you have to put yourself out there in the most nerve-wracking situation, when honestly there are smaller ways to make progress on the things you want to make progress in. So the example I have here is I'm a growth product manager. Metrics are super important to every product manager. They're super, super important to growth product managers. And I would get very stressed at the idea of presenting metrics to our product org every month, which is something that other PMs on my team would do. And so what I did is I started by just presenting to the engineers and like getting used to finding the information and understanding the information and taking questions about it, and then growing in that aspect. Because otherwise, if it's either 0 or 1, which is I don't do it at all, or I do it at the highest scale, I'm never actually going to make the progress that allows me to confidently take on the bigger version of this. And I won't be able to learn along the way in ways that make me more equipped for the larger situations. So recap. Focus on being your best with self-compassion rather than being the best, and understanding that your best will continue to change. Log and take pride of accomplishments, easy or hard, big or small, they're still an accomplishment. Praise effort over outcomes, because all we can control is our actions. We can't control every aspect of a situation. And create a culture of asking questions, learning from failure, and proactively supporting others. So, as I mentioned, I'm the author from Fraud to Freedom. This is the very beautiful book cover, and this is an outline of some of the topics in that book if you're interested. So talking about imposter syndrome, don't fake it until you make it. Letting go of perfectionism, asking questions, practicing positivity, embracing compliments. And then there's a section on intersectionality with imposter syndrome, because we don't all experience it the same. So what it looks like with race, with gender, and being first gen, all of which are categories that have been relevant to me and my experience of imposter syndrome. And then also for those who are coaches or mentors or managers, managing those with imposter syndrome. And then company culture's responsibility, because thinking that imposter syndrome is a solo problem to solve would be a failure to all of us, and trying to make sure that at all levels we are addressing what we can so that we can all grow together. And now we get to talk to the fun part, which is Q&A/discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I wrote down 1,000 notes during this little presentation. Thank you so much, Phyllis. This was incredible, and for me, really meaningful and very impactful. And if you don't mind, I'd actually just like to jump right in and ask you something immediately, because, you know, as a product person, one of the pieces of advice you give is to praise others for their efforts over outcomes. And I find, you know, that's a really interesting sentence to say in a product management context, you know, because we're so obsessed with outcomes over outputs as a conversation. Obviously, there's no outcomes without the outputs. And this is about, you know, encouraging people to generate those outcomes, of course, but through the outputs, by focusing on the outputs. But, you know, I feel like in our community, in the product management community, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. I almost feel that like there's more imposter syndrome among product managers in my lived experience than in some of maybe the other adjacent areas. So do you think there is an inherent conflict in that, you know, focusing on efforts over outcomes when we work and live in environments that are entirely outcome focused? And how do you negotiate between the two?
Yeah, so I think very fair question. So fun fact, my book actually started as a book on imposter syndrome for product managers because of exactly what you said, which is there's so much of that experience related to being in product work. And part of that is like so much is undefined and so much is uncertain. Then you're working in an industry where certain people have been historically excluded. And all of those things compound to a lot of imposter syndrome happening. So I think that's a very fair point. In terms of the efforts versus outcomes, the thing that I like to differentiate there is like the outcome of the person versus the outcome of the work, right? So it's like if I run an experiment and we're trying to lift customer volume, for example, that outcome is genuinely important, right? And that is something that we should be measuring, and the work itself is being measured on outcomes. But my worth as a person is not being measured on those outcomes, and trying to keep those things separate, which I understand can be very hard because it's like, I'm the one leading the work and therefore this is representative of me. And that ends up being like a team/company culture conversation, because there's a way to handle talking about the outcomes of any experiment that I lead to like grow customer volume versus how we talk about the outcome of Phyllis as a PM, right? So it's like something I appreciate about my current work environment is we'll talk about the fact that if I send a readout on an experiment, right? So if I write up the results of an experiment and send that readout out to the greater org, people still compliment the thoroughness of the analysis, right? Or like the thoughtfulness of the design, et cetera. There are ways to talk about the things that people put into an effort separate from the actual outcome of that effort. And obviously, if I send out an email that says, 10 million customers a month were added from this test, that praise looks very different, but it doesn't deny the fact that there's also praise to be made, no matter what the outcome is, for the design work that went into it, the research that went into it, the analysis that went into it. And I appreciate being at a place where there's space held for both, regardless of what the outcome is. So something I mentioned when I was going through the slides is like the importance of the word and remembering that things do not have to be separate. It's not either we talk about the effort or either we talk about the outcomes. We can talk about the outcomes and still talk about all the efforts, and we can talk about the efforts and still talk about the outcomes, because both of those things are important. And then just understanding when we're talking about outcomes, we're talking about the outcomes of the thing we worked on, but we're not talking about the outcomes as a reflection of our own value in our work.
That makes a lot of sense. Chiara, Swati, do you have any questions for Phyllis?
I would love to ask some questions, Swati, if you want to jump in though, like just yell. I'll go. That was amazing, thank you. Like imposter syndrome is something I've been thinking about and talking about with people for a really long time, but that I was not busy on Slack. I was also taking a ton of notes when you were talking. I really it felt very concrete around why people feel like that and what you can do about it, which is awesome. Like actually that's the first time I've there's like lots of light bulbs going through my head, so thank you. None of those are questions, just me talking, but yeah, it was amazing. I'm definitely getting your book. I think for me, a few questions. I'm going to start with what, in terms of, you obviously touched on it in terms of company culture, like one of the things I've increasingly the way that I've thought about imposter syndrome is just like, it's good for it to have a name, but like the reason that imposter syndrome exists is because of systemic bigger problems, right? Like if we were all, like you said, if we were all kind of treated equally and there weren't all double standards and things like that, like theoretically maybe none of us would experience imposter syndrome. So but at the same time there's obviously a pragmatic thing of well, I live in the world and I need a way of fitting it. But in terms of what you've seen work well, like how can you impact that more sort of systemic piece, within your team, within a company, like in general? Yeah, just be interested to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I'm very excited to know what you think about it as you make progress. Feel free to message me and ask questions or leave comments or any of the above. In terms of, I really appreciate your point about if we were all treated equally, none of us would be experiencing imposter syndrome, which I think is a very interesting point. In terms of what I do to address the larger systemic issues, one is model openly discussing failure. So part of the experience here is, it's if I as a Black woman and like our chief growth officer is a white man, and it's if he never talks about failing and then I feel like I'm always failing, that discrepancy can be addressed by him talking about his failures and realizing that we're both just human beings who are trying our best and we're going to fail at things. I think it's a really, really important first step, because even with those systemic differences, if we start to attribute someone's differences to the reason that they're failing versus discussing failure as a thing that we're all experiencing, that's part of how the systemic issues start to come into factor and start to play a part in how we're experiencing imposter syndrome. So I think that part is very, very critical. And then another part is representation matters, right? So it's you're going to feel like an imposter in this space where nobody has ever looked like you and nobody looks like you currently. And if you feel like you don't share the experience of people around you, and yet you're also feeling like you're not doing well in whatever experience you're having, the mind will take shortcuts and will try to make you think, or other people's minds will take shortcuts and will say the reason that you're having a different experience is because of your differences. And by different experience, I mean like a harder experience is because of your differences, versus understanding that like we literally all feel this way, and everything happens imperfectly to all of us, and all the things that we do, all of us will experience some degree of stress and learning and a learning curve and challenge and growth. And if we think that we're the only person experiencing these challenges, and then we look around and we're like, we're also the only person that looks like us in these spaces, it can be very difficult. So it's like two factors, which is like, regardless of how the representation of other people around you looks, everyone needs to be talking about the fact that these are universal experiences, and failure is just a part of what it means to be human and to be learning. And then with that is understanding that because that experience is happening across people, it's not because of any demographic factor of our own experience. And then trying to make sure that the representation becomes important, because it's like, one, seeing failure in people who don't look like us, but also seeing success in people who look like us, are like different approaches that converge on the same thing, which is like, this is just a universal experience. And without understanding that this is universal experience, then we'll continue to attribute it to ourselves personally in a way that like hyper indexes on us and fails to address the systemic environment at hand, which is what you're addressing.
It's really helpful, thank you.
You said you had more questions. I'm ready.
I do. I just wanted to see if anyone else wanted to jump in first.
Yes. Hi. So I don't have a question right now, but then I just wanted to thank you for sharing your thoughts. And while you were presenting, I was taking notes, and I was just, thinking about the situations. Few points that came to my mind was, for example, about embracing compliments. So this, I've struggled with it a lot. And something yesterday, somebody thanked me for one of the reviews that I shared with them, and then they were like, thank you so much for the kind words. And I was like, oh no, it was long due. So you're welcome. So it's just that, yeah, I've observed that I do justify it. No, that's okay. It's nothing. So yeah, I'm still working on that. It's okay to say you're welcome. That I'm still, just reminding myself again and again. Yeah, also, I was introduced to imposter syndrome a few months back when I shifted to product management, because I've worked 5 years in the past. And surprisingly, I've never faced such situation that, okay, am I good at it? Am I not good at it? Because I was like, oh no, I worked, I'm good at it. That's it. So when I shifted to product management, then I was like, okay. So they hired me. Okay, I'm good at it. I'm not good at it. Okay. So yeah, I think yeah, this experience also was with me. It was basically when I shifted to product management. So I could relate to Mirza's statement that this exists more in the product community. And so I was just thinking that when you mentioned praising the efforts over outcomes, and as Mirza also pointed out, that in product world we often focus on outcomes and outputs. It's just that the environment around us, when it focuses more on outcomes and outputs, there would be little things that we could do to praise each other. And I think for me, it's more about psychological safety and the culture around that it should match with our own thinking as well. Because if the organization focus just on outcomes and then there are no talks about efforts, so maybe we are at the wrong organization, or maybe there's something more to it that we're not focusing on. Or yeah, so for me, I think it's just that what we can do from our end, but then we cannot control other people's action and our environment around us. So do you have any thoughts on that, if we are in such situations or environment?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the comments and thoughts there, and I agree. It can be hard to just take a compliment and let it sit there. But sometimes you just got to sit in the tension of accepting a compliment without deflecting it. And that takes practice. And depending on the praise you're receiving can feel very weird. And the piece about the efforts versus outcomes and like how other people want to talk about it, even if you want to talk about efforts versus outcomes, I think that you can't control other people, you can influence other people. So for example, for me, I've actually done this at the company that I work at. To be fair, like we have a reasonable culture where this is something that wasn't crazy for me to be doing or saying, but maybe that's different where you're at. But if you are in a place where people seem receptive to like trying to do things differently, something that I said is like, as a company, we're focused on like, growing revenue, as a lot of companies are. And something that I had a hard time with last year is feeling like we were only praising things that grew revenue and not acknowledging other aspects of people's work. And I brought that up to my manager and I was like, hey, like this is making it hard for me to work because it feels like I'm just competing for praise about growing revenue as if the rest of my job doesn't have value here unless it grows revenue. And then you end up with some weird behaviors, right? Where people start like hacking growing revenue while they're actually like deteriorating the culture of the company or doing things that are in bad practice. And so I was just very transparent with her about the fact that like, if we want people to continue doing their best work, I want us to be a place where we acknowledge people's best work, even if it doesn't have the revenue driving impact that we'd otherwise want it to have. And she escalated that to her manager. And the next email that I wrote about an experiment that failed, the responses to that actually were different. And like, I immediately noticed a difference in how people were talking about it. So as I mentioned, talking about the quality of the design or the research or the analysis that was put into it is something that has tangibly changed about how we talk about things. Because I was like, hey, I know revenue is important, but it is not the only thing that makes a company a company. And I think that that's a worthwhile conversation worth having. And there's easily a world in which I said that, and then she didn't care and nobody else cared. And they all just wanted to continue to talk about only revenue. But knowing that I at least attempted to bring this to the attention of other people and present the value of talking about the work that we're doing in this way is something that I could relieve my conscience of at the very least. And then at best, exactly what happened, which is now everyone is benefiting from their work being acknowledged, regardless of what happens with revenue. And at the same time, when the revenue is there, we praise that too. So don't think that you are incapable of changing the things around you. I also want to emphasize the fact that it is not your responsibility to change other people, but you're more than welcome to try if it's something that matters to you. And if you try and people don't seem receptive to it, then you know that you've at least tried to influence them in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking the question.
I
hope it goes well if you do it.
Thank you.
I love this. Well, I love a lot of the things that you just said, but especially this sense, don't think that you're incapable of changing things around you. I'm kind of thinking of, because there was a lot of practical tips that throughout this conversation that you shared. And I want to go back to something you talked about. You mentioned one of your managers or leaders, sharing their own vulnerability or sharing their own examples and stories of failure or whatever you want to call it. Thinking of it from a perspective of a leader or a people manager, what are some other practical ways do you think that a manager could support their employees, their reports, in handling and tackling imposter syndrome? So I love that the first example you had was all about sharing your own vulnerability, because personally a very big believer in that. But are there other things you would advise or that you've experienced yourself?
Yeah, have many things. One, the first thing is going to be related to my other answers, which is managers' responsibility in being vulnerable about the areas in which they've made mistakes or failures, and being a leader and being responsible for those things and taking actions to ameliorate those situations. That's something that I found to be really powerful, because if you have a manager or mentor or a leader who just acts like they're perfect all the time, there's two things. Either everybody knows they're not perfect and now we're all just annoyed because they're putting on this front, which is like its own problem. Or, let's say you're new to the company or you're not very familiar with that person's work. You're like, oh, like this person is so perfect. And that person's just a person like you, and they're not going to get everything right. So setting the tone of like, me, as senior as I am, as many people report to me, as much as I have to manage, I'm also making mistakes with all of that. And that's just a part of the process. At the beginning, I said that imposter syndrome is something to be managed and to grow through, not something to overcome, which means that these leaders and managers are also experiencing their own challenges in the roles that they're in. And if we fail to talk about it, the higher and higher we get, the more it seems like, one, we can never make a mistake the higher and higher we get, and that creates a lot of pressure. But two, doesn't it set the example or the environment for people around you to be comfortable owning up to their mistakes and seeking help and growing from them? So that's the first one. And then the other one is like, I love when people who are super senior or lead a large area or are incredibly knowledgeable ask all the questions. And sometimes I'll literally screenshot it because it warms my heart so much that it's not just like the new person or the person who's like lowest in their role who like doesn't know what's happening or what's going on or what a term means or how to use something, right? It's like when my director is like, what does GTM mean here? And it's like, oh, I didn't know what that meant either. And you didn't know what that meant either. And that's great. That means that sometimes people just don't know how something works or what it means. And it's not because there's anything wrong with me. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. And it's not because if you're more senior, then you're supposed to understand everything magically. And if I'm not, then I have to catch up magically. It's like, we just don't know everything. And I love when people are willing to show that they don't know everything by just asking questions that other people have. And taking it a step further, I love when people ask questions that they already know the answer to, but they think other people might have the question. That's like my favorite, because that's like really tone setting the environment, where it's like, oh, like this, like, this principal PM is asking like what LTV means here. And it's like, you know what LTV means, but the new PM we just hired actually doesn't know what LTV means and was very scared about asking. And now we all get to talk about what the lifetime value is in this scenario and all be on the same shared understanding. So just creating that environment where like, just because you're senior, a manager, a mentor, or leader, that you don't experience failure, that you know everything, and shifting that around to be able to be vulnerable in situations and show that you don't know everything and that you're also going to make mistakes. And then also as a leader, praising people publicly, I think is really important. Like acknowledging the value that people are contributing is something that I appreciate about some of the people that I work with, right? So I actually implemented this, and the thing that I love about this conversation is making me realize how much I've influenced people at work to be much more growth oriented. But there's a Slack channel that we have that's called Growth Gratitude, where people shout out the contributions of other people. And something that I love is that a lot of directors use that channel, and they'll be like, oh, like this person on my team did this thing, et cetera, et cetera. And acknowledging that like, no matter what level you're at or what experience you have or what department you're in, your contributions are valuable. And the person who has valuable contributions isn't just like the senior person. And sometimes I love when people take the extra step to acknowledge all the other people that helped them arrive at a success. So like, let's say that there's like, we have like the director of like buying customer volume, and then we have like a super huge win. And then like, they get to say like, oh, we've like increased revenue on the buy side by this much. And then going that extra step and saying like, all of these people contributed to that in this way, makes people feel very seen, and then is a part of that culture of acknowledging other people's efforts as well, and acknowledging that people contribute value in their own individual ways, even if all of that bubbles up into the same like shared value. So TLDR, there's a lot of things that people who are more senior or our leaders and managers can do. And a lot of that involves being vulnerable about their own failures and mistakes, while also doing extra to acknowledge all the successes and achievements of the people who are around them and contributing to their work.
So basically just working to create a healthy work culture is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Which is amazing. I mean, it kind of goes back to Chiara's also earlier point about it being a systemic issue that's causing us to feel this way. But Chiara, do you have any other questions?
Got lots buzzing around. I'd love to just sit and chat for ages. I think in terms of like questions, do you get a sense of how do you see people experiencing imposter syndromes in different ways at kind of different stages of their careers? I guess why am I asking that question? I think for me, so as like right now I've helped start a group for like women and non-binary people who are on the tech side of the business. It's been super interesting, and this is kind of strength to D&I more generally, but there's like me and another person who are like kind of more in the like middle of our careers, definitely the oldest people in the group, who are like, this group is so important, I'm so glad it exists. And you've got people who are like way younger, who are just at the start of their careers, are almost, it's nice, but I don't really know why I need it, because they haven't been in the workplace that long, so they haven't kind of bumped into some of this stuff. But some of the things that are coming up are things around like imposter syndrome. And like, for me, how I think about imposter syndrome now is like, I almost like notice it. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling like I have no idea what I'm doing. That's familiar. It will pass. I'm just going to ignore it and carry on. Although I feel like the tips you've given me have been much more helpful. But yeah, like for people who are, you've talked about what leaders can do for people who are like earlier in their career. The things that, people earlier in their career can like proactively do, or try and look out for people who are like later in their career or more leadership positions. Does that make sense as a question? It's a bit of a ramble.
Yeah, no, let me know if I'm addressing what you've asked, but the thing that comes to mind for me, especially for people who are leading, is the difference between questioning, can I do this? And then questioning, can I help other people do this? Right. So it's like, if you're entering a new role, you're IC, like an individual contributor level, you like start as a PM and you're like, oh my God, like this is so much. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to handle this. It's all like very I oriented. And that doubt is on whether you yourself can achieve in this specific circumstance. And then let's say you become the director, a VP, president, et cetera. Now you're responsible for all these people. And maybe up until this point, you've managed to figure out how to make yourself successful on the things that you yourself are doing. And now you're questioning, damn, can I really help other people be successful in the things that they're doing? I don't know if I know how to do that. So it's an interesting shift in terms of like, who's the subject of that doubt, and like the level of influence on top of what it means to make a certain situation successful is the way that I've seen it change as people progress through different levels, because it's no longer about like what I'm doing for myself, it's what I'm doing for other people, and whether in doing that, I will help them be more successful in the things that they also need to do for themselves. And then another aspect that I think is pretty interesting about that is like the difference between like proving that I have to know everything so that other people will think that I am doing my job right, versus proving that I have to know everything so that other people can think that I will help them do their job right. Is again a shift in like, am I talking about myself, or am I talking about how I'm influencing and leading other people? But it's like, when I'm sitting here trying to understand things, I'm trying to understand them for myself so that I can do whatever I need to do more effectively. And then I feel this pressure to get everything right and prove that I know everything because it's the work that I'm doing, versus as a leader thinking that I need to prove that I know everything so that other people can trust me to help them know the things that they need to know. And that's like, there's a nuanced difference there, but there is a difference in like the purpose and intention behind trying to prove what you know and who you're proving it for and what the purpose of that knowledge is for. And so that's how I'd also describe some of the differences there. And then thinking about like, who do you even talk to, right? There are fewer and fewer people who are sharing your experience as you're going to higher and higher levels. And even though, yes, imposter syndrome is a similar feeling and a similar experience, and the things that are going to be helpful are probably going to be helpful across the board, part of what becomes important about imposter syndrome is like being able to talk to other people and learn from other people. And as you progress, there might be fewer and fewer people to learn from. And right, tying it back to how systemic issues are at play here, especially if you're of like any identity that is not historically included in wherever you are. Now it feels like you have even fewer, if anyone, to talk to about what you're experiencing. And that can be a very interesting type of stress. Like if we're to talk about like all the people who are aspiring to be PMs, there's like thousands and thousands of them. And if any one of them were to be like, I have imposter syndrome, there's thousands and thousands of people be like, oh my God, me too. And now we're talking about the senior director of product at like a large tech company, unicorn. There's like 500 of them. Who knows how many of them want to talk about imposter syndrome, and who knows how many of them want to talk about it with me. So that might also be a difference, is like, how do I even speak about this experience with other people who can help me and relate in a way that motivates me to continue to try in the aspects that I'm doing, as opposed to talking about an imposter syndrome to like be positively motivating to people who are on the path to where I'm at. And so I feel like there might be like a feeling of a lack of support at that level, and trying to understand that imposter syndrome is a shared universal experience, and you don't necessarily need to only be talking to people who are in your very specific circumstance, even though that can be helpful. There just might be more of a scarce opportunity to do that as you're progressing through your career.
That is super helpful, like really, really helpful. It resonated so much, like just, I mean, I'm definitely not the senior product manager in a unicorn or whatever right now, but like I'm, you know, further on in my career, and there's a couple of people I'm mentoring, someone who's trying to get into products and someone who's like early in her career. And actually all the things that you said, I was like, oh yeah, I really recognize I've literally had that conversation with her, like with one of them. And then like, that is a conversation I've had with other people about how I feel. But yeah, like, yeah, completely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. That was really helpful.
I've always been, you know, fascinated when it comes to imposter syndrome. You know, all this research out there that says it's especially like women, people of color, non-binary folk that are super successful in like leadership roles that report they feel it the most. And in my personal experience, the first time I managed people, the people I managed were my former peers, because I was, you know, a member of a team and then just got promoted and became their manager. And that was a really strange experience, because they were all my friends and now I was their boss. And I had a kind of imposter syndrome there that I've never had since, because it was both a personal thing, you know, it was about, will I fail these people as friends? And that was a really, really tough thing to navigate as well. But because I do think it's different. I felt a different kind of imposter syndrome depending on what I was doing, what the environment was, what level of responsibility was on my shoulders, or at least what I perceived, you know, the burden of my responsibility. You know, because I've definitely exaggerated and overblown it in my head, for sure, very often. And to the point that sometimes it was paralyzing, you know, to the point where, because I really liked earlier you said, Phyllis, that if you feel this, you should start doing something in a low pressure way. So low risk, low pressure. And I think I had, it took me years to learn that lesson, because I was always trying to do things by starting big. because you want to, you know, you're kind of socialized and conditioned into this idea that, you know, you have to do a big launch of everything. You have to present yourself super confidently. You have to, you know, show this big bang, you know, because that's how you get promoted. That's how you succeed. That's how, like, you know, incessant, constant growth. And like you said, it always has to be bigger than the thing before. And it, you know, it took me a long time to understand that you can build it up bit by bit, also help yourself on the way, become more comfortable with the subject matter, with the environment, with the people around you. So I thought that was really excellent advice.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you realized that lesson. And I do think people do put pressure on them. Like even when people talk about like side projects or hobbies, they're like, oh, like I'm gonna buy like the nicest camera and I'm gonna have 1,000 followers by my first month or whatever. It's just like, maybe just like record into your phone and stick with the 3 followers you have for a while, right? And that consistency compounds. And then what happens is that because people don't see that big result that they expect immediately, it just stops them from progressing at all on the thing, versus like if they had taken a long tail view, long tail is probably long-term view and making progress, that would have been more effective in aggregate, even if like at any micro stage, it seems like, I don't know if it's that big of a deal.
I hope you won't mind me sharing this, something you told me privately, Phyllis, about this community, piece of advice you gave me that I think is really useful and resonates. You know, you advised me not to try to grow the community for the sake of growth, for the sake of, you know, growing the numbers, but to focus on, you know, creating something meaningful for however many of us there are. You know, there's 4 of us in this call today. And that's amazing. We're having a very intimate, cozy conversation. That's incredible. And it's and I love that. I think that's kind of the philosophy that that I'd like to carry around with myself, with me, you know, to more things, not just to side projects, you know, because I think especially in a work context, this can be really hard. You know, you know, you talked earlier about growing revenue at the expense of your culture, you know, because especially in this moment in time where most of our companies are cost cutting and, you know, there's a lot of short-termists, like, let's just get that ARR or whatever, and then figure it out what happens later, no matter what the cost on the human side of things might be. So I think it's also a really tough moment in time. I think we all feel a lot of imposter syndrome at the moment, you know, also because a lot of people are on the job market right now. It's a tough time to be out there. How do you build resilience? Is that something you should even strive to build? Does building resilience help minimize or manage imposter syndrome? Is that even a form of managing imposter syndrome? Because I have my doubts about that. You know, resilience as a concept, I'm always a little conflicted about it. On the one hand, I think, yes, I should be more resilient. On the other hand, I wonder, is there a way to be resilient that's actually healthy and productive?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. On the note of the making progress, I think there's a difference between like making personal progress and making progress in the context of a company that reports quarterly to shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's this very specific type of pressure that actually requires to do things like in big impact and soon, versus like when I first started working out, I only went to the gym for 10 minutes. And now here I am a year later, and I think I worked out for like 2 hours yesterday. So it takes time, and there's like a long-term view there, but sometimes you're in a context that a long-term view is not going to happen. And that's like a conversation that's related to the context of the job, but I'll try to answer the resilience thing. So I think resilience is incredibly annoying as a concept because people try to tell you to be resilient and only resilient. Nobody says, try and be resilient, but we'll also try to just fix the thing that you need to be resilient against. And that's why I don't like to talk about resilience, because it feels like a way to deflect from the nature of the environment and the context and the situation in which you're putting people. And it fails to acknowledge that certain situations people should just not be put in, right? And it's like, oh, like, yes, we're going to pay you half and you're going to work twice as much, but be resilient. And it's like, maybe I just should not be in that situation. And so that's why I kind of pull back whenever resilience is brought up, but it's still important, just like in life and in general, but it's as important as it matters to you being able to get through whatever you need to get through, but it is not the only factor. And to me, it's actually not even the most important factor. Like if we can build a better environment, that matters to me way more than building better resilience as individuals. So I do think that there's value in that. I just don't want people to get hung up on like trying to become more resilient without acknowledging that sometimes you're just in a crap situation, and that situation is actually the thing that needs to change, right? So it's like, yes, there is a value as in you got laid off last year, you're looking for a job. It is important to be resilient and try to move forward, but we also need to acknowledge like the way your company treated you when they laid you off was very crappy, and like that severance package was non-existent, and the hiring managers that have been communicating with you have not been respectful, and you're dealing with all of these factors that are not fair for you to be dealing with in the first place. And if we only talk about resilience without acknowledging those other pieces, then we put a really undue burden on any person as an individual to face a circumstance that actually is responsible for changing.
Yeah, I think that's you really placed it well in the context of the present moment in time. I think a lot of people are experiencing exactly this kind of thing, and struggling. I love that this conversation went into, from just talking about what we as individuals have to do to change ourselves to manage our imposter syndrome, to how do we affect change in the environments that cause our imposter syndrome in the first place. I think, yeah, that's a fantastic message. We're over time, but I'll give one last chance for anyone to ask any last questions or share any thoughts you have before we sign off for the day.
For me, I need to drop now, but just thank you so much. Like I found this incredibly valuable and useful, and I'm like super excited about your book, and to kind of see what else you do. But also in terms of what you said around, don't grow the community for the sake of it. Like for me, this has been massively valuable. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I'm going to go and share with like people that I'm mentoring and like groups that I'm in at work and communities more generally. So like, even though maybe it doesn't feel like there's huge numbers, like for me, it's been incredibly impactful. So thank you.
Thanks. I'm super excited for that. I love a good butterfly effect, and I appreciate you joining us.
No, not at all. But yeah, I have to drop. But yeah, thank you so much. It was really lovely to speak to you all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. All right. And then just before we go, Phyllis, how can people reach you if they want to talk to you, if they want to ask you questions? What's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, I would love if people reach out to me on LinkedIn. That would be great. I have my notifications turned on. But also people could just email me, TBH, but connect with me on LinkedIn first so that you can get my email in the first place, and so that your emails don't end up going to spam because they're from some random person. But yeah, as of now, LinkedIn is my current platform.
All right, I'll share contact details in follow-ups, including a recording of this call today. All right, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Phyllis. Again, thank you to our audience and guests who asked questions today. And yay, first AMA, Product Cuties.
Yay.
And that's signing off for today. We'll see you next time. Have a good time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. All right.